With Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Pikmin 4, and Splatoon 3 receiving updates years after they were considered content complete, in the case of Splatoon 3, after the developers had even confirmed that they had issued their final substantive update, does this open up the possibility of another old game returning with new content? A return indeed to one of Nintendo's hugest titles of this current decade. Could Nintendo really do a late in life DLC for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom? Around the time of the game's launch, the developers confirmed the game was complete as it was, but then so did the Splatoon 3 developers after all. As far as the Switch edition went, it pretty much was, and while the Switch 2 edition enhanced the graphics and added the Zelda Notes app, there has been no significant expansion of the core content. There are some significant omissions though. Firstly, the game lacks a master mode or similar variant, distinguishing it notably from Breath of the Wild. One of the benefits of Master Mode for me was less that I enjoyed the enhanced challenge, as personally that's not really my thing, but that it allowed me to start a new quest without overwriting my existing one. The Nintendo Switch 2 edition version of the game allows you to do that, but as a bare minimum, adding in a mode late in life that allows people to revisit Tears of the Kingdom might be a great way to nudge people to re-experiencing the game all at once. Let's say if you had an anniversary coming up or a film to promote and you wanted to create a moment around that film. Well, a DLC drop like this feels like it would be on par with the Pikmin 4 adaptations, additions which would be big enough to cause excitement but small enough that they would mostly serve as a promotional tool and a way to re-engage people with a game that has considerable popularity. I'm not saying that a DLC upgrade might be limited to Master Mode, of course. Nintendo generally likes to pair high challenge updates with low challenge provisions, so Donkey Kong Country Returns HD's Switch 2 DLC added the insanely difficult Turbo Attack mode, but it also added Dixie Kong, who makes the game significantly easier in places. If Nintendo were to add in perhaps some kind of anniversary mode, where you could get item drops or other aid perhaps tied to further amiibo, use of a Zelda app, Nintendo Switch Online membership, or some other mechanism pertinent to their interests, it feels like we could see some kind of casual mode being added on as well. Or they could even do the same thing they did with Pikmin and introduce a photography-focused mode. What if, for the anniversary, the ghosts of Zelda characters past would appear to haunt the Hyrule of the Wild, requiring tracking down and photographing? Completing a special anniversary album would be a highly casual play experience that would nevertheless engage people who aren't into challenge modes to return to the world of Tears of the Kingdom. I don't think they're done using Zelda Notes either, and it's quite possible that there could be some kind of expansion of that app. The fact is that DLC such as this wouldn't have to coincide with the 40th anniversary, of course. Nintendo clearly plans that Tears of the Kingdom will become one of their all-time evergreens, and if Fire Red and Leaf Green can be sold as new more than 2 decades after their first release, you can bet that they will want to be selling Tears of the Kingdom the same way for at least as long. Leaving some options on the table for it to return is a natural move, and they may feel that they don't need to expand the game for the 40th anniversary if they have other content they want to push at this point. New games, merchandise, and features. A Tears of the Kingdom expansion is the kind of back pocket option that they can always deploy on a rainy day. It also may be logistically difficult for them at the present time to give too much attention to Tears of the Kingdom if they are, as we can expect, working on at least two new Zelda projects, Open Air and Top Down, if not more, assuming that their teams will cope with the travails of ever-lengthening development times by splitting down into multiple groups, such as Game Freak appears to have done with the Legends and the Generational development groups working concurrently. Still, Nintendo has some experience with this kind of thing. The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe team was led by a sub-team with a different director, and the Booster Course Pass team had a different lead again. Giving someone in their group experience by shepherding a smaller project is something that Nintendo do from time to time, and even if they didn't have the capacity in 2023 to start up something like this, that's not to say that the opportunity might not have cropped up by 2024 or 2025 to launch a separate group focused on Tears of the Kingdom DLC, especially since we know the priority that they are putting on keeping these evergreen titles from the Switch alive in their catalogue on Switch 2 as people slowly transition over to the new system. The question therefore becomes, what if they decide to go for something a bit bigger than just a free anniversary upgrade? What if Nintendo decide to do a full-on paid DLC set? In 2017, Nintendo issued a season pass for Breath of the Wild, for $20. On day one, there were a few extra treasure chests, including a Nintendo Switch t-shirt, and then there were two further waves, the Master Trials in the summer and the Story DLC, The Champion's Ballad, in December 2017, which included a new dungeon and a boss, 16 more shrines, and of course the Master Cycle Zero as a reward. The expansion pass of Breath of the Wild had the benefit that they increased the sales on day one when Nintendo desperately needed it after the long fallow period during the Wii U days, but the DLC pack had presumably been selling consistently ever since. Even if only 10% of the Breath of the Wild users bought the DLC pack, that's still more than 3 million people. It's very likely the DLC pack makes more than many full-price games, and of course games like Xenoblade and Fire Emblem have long utilised substantial DLC after their game's release. After Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's $35 cost for that game's DLC, it feels like there is scope for a prestige title like Tears of the Kingdom to command a $40 asking price for a very substantial expansion, and again, it doesn't take all that significant a sliver of the Tears of the Kingdom install base to try the game to drive massive sales, especially if at least some of the aspects of the title were confined to the Switch 2 edition, which would both cut down development costs in optimizing for the older hardware and further nudge players to pick up a Switch 2 if they have yet to do so. Tears of the Kingdom is unusually well suited to expansion in this way. The depths are huge but largely empty, and while some more substantial Sky Islands had long been a dream of Tears of the Kingdom fans, after the Great Sky Island turned out to be the exception rather than the rule in terms of the scope of Sky Island experiences, there may be other options left on the table, other worlds or caves or different ways in order to expand the world of Tears of the Kingdom out in subtle but still enjoyable manners. Narratively, the game would likely be absorbed into the existing title like Breath of the Wild's DLC was. Having Tears of the Kingdom without the broader world might feel like a rather odd move, and updating the entire world to properly reflect Ganondorf's defeat will be a far bigger project than a DLC budget would permit. Having said that, Monolith Soft, whose Zelda team worked extensively on the Wild titles, have some experience with DLC that actually introduces brand new areas completely, often with subtly different versions of the gameplay mechanics from the base game. A version of Tears of the Kingdom set on a large but very distant island, remote from the core Hyrule, with its own sky and depth section, a few unique Zonai devices, a smaller scale self-contained narrative could really be a powerful way to recycle the core Tears of the Kingdom mechanics which took so much development time originally. It could also be a great way to give a potential future team some experience in developing the Zelda while the main group focus on the next game, since the core structure of the game is already complete. It's just a matter of adapting it for the specific options they're trying to include. The difficulty with original titles for the anniversary is that they need to be made from scratch, but doubling down on the core Tears of the Kingdom mechanics and further exploiting them is a far more effective use of their time. Even the most expansive DLCs seldom have the development costs of the original, and as a result, people would be drawn not to yet more products, but to the most prestige and frankly high profile and highest price product on the Nintendo shelf in the Zelda category at the moment, Tears of the Kingdom. There is another opportunity as well, which is to introduce or develop characters that they might want to feature in the films. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that they would develop a game purely to plug a film, but obviously the same commercial pressures that dictate that new concepts are often better with Mario's face slapped on might also mean that if they're introducing a new character, it might be just as well to use someone already known in the Zelda universe, whether an existing Wild era character like Impa or Raro, or a Cryak character like Gunpei or Tingle. It's not like the story itself is generally front of mind when developing these titles compared to the core mechanics, and we know that Nintendo's head honchos have made specific requests in the past, not least the request to EPD8 to do a game specifically centered around Donkey Kong, so asking for the DLC team to at least be mindful of possible uses for the characters who were intended for use in the film might simply be prudent. Again, there's no particular time pressure for releasing such a major DLC. It will be a massive event title whichever year it launched in, and kind of reminds me of the Animal Crossing and Mario Kart 8 Booster Course Pass DLC, which of course in those cases were both tied to the expansion pass. And again, there's no particular time pressure for releasing such a major DLC. It will be a massive event title whichever year it launched in. In some respects, it might be better to wait for a later point, perhaps to give Tears of the Kingdom a second wind after a bit of a fallow period. Although then again, there are still a lot of people who own Breath of the Wild who do not yet, from the numbers, own Tears of the Kingdom, and this might be a bit of a priority for Nintendo this anniversary to get people to move over to experience Tears if they have previously enjoyed Breath of the Wild. However, there are particular advantages to launching it in the next year or so specifically. Recall how Nintendo handled the Breath of the Wild DLC, with the pass being purchased up front, but content releasing across the next 6 months, with the bulk of the DLC pass actually not dropping until that December. Nintendo has done this before, most obviously with the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, where the pass was on sale from February 2022, even though the first set of courses weren't actually released until March, and of course there were 5 further waves stretching back until November 2023. This, by the way, had the additional benefit of promoting the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, and if Nintendo did want to release such a significant staggered set of DLC, it would be a great opportunity for them if they want it, and eventually I think they will, to increase the price of the base online service. Yet again, I'm not advocating for this, but I do think it's going to happen pretty soon, and I do think also Nintendo will have something fairly major to go alongside it at that point. If a Tears of the Kingdom similarly had multiple waves, then there's the potential for Nintendo to be continuously highlighting Zelda and the Tears of the Kingdom games specifically through not just the anniversary window, but also the window of the film's approach and release. The Breath of the Wild DLC shows how this might go. A small purchase bonus out of the gate, then a modest expansion such as the Master Mode, a boss rush challenge and some extra features a few months on, and then finally a major story DLC potentially not for some time, maybe a year or 9 months after the announcement of the DLC. The great advantage of this is that it solves the big problems and objections we've had so far, which is how they would have the development capacity while building up other teams. In actuality, a DLC group might not have started planning until 2025, and if the final DLC drop were to release in, let's say, the spring of 2027, even a smaller team would have plenty of time to recruit the people they need to make this a reality. It also has the advantage of front-loading their income to a point where they might want to do everything they can to protect the base price of the Switch 2 from price rises linked to memory costs. Charging $5 extra than they originally planned on a DLC they had never previously announced might be an easier call to make than bumping up the base price of the console itself, which they want to get into the tens of millions sold and into homes over the course of the next few months. I didn't pluck Spring 2027 out of the air either. My thought process here is that the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Super Mario Bros. Wonder included a major expansion focused on multiplayer. Multiplayer Zelda has long been an aspiration, and in certain respects a smaller pilot game to test the waters might make a lot of sense for the Zelda series at this point. Many people have observed that Bowser's Fury felt like a pilot project for an open Mario game in much the same way. The early images from the film suggest that Link and Zelda will be together for at least one scene early on. This isn't a case of them finally meeting in film 2. But currently, there isn't really a game where both Link and Zelda are playable concurrently. A bolt-on to Tears of the Kingdom which focused on multiplayer would also showcase both game share and potentially game chat, which will obviously be major elements for Nintendo's Switch 2 promotional strategy. Even if this game was envisioned back in 2023, it would also technically be true that there was no expansion for Tears of the Kingdom planned if the intent was always to do a development that prioritized Switch 2, and locking DLC behind the Switch 2 upgrade might be a way to move a good number of people to the new system. This would fit with Nintendo's strategy of maximizing their use of older games ahead of movies and providing new content going forward. I think in the very long term, some kind of DLC project like this is actually quite likely. Adding Plus games even to older titles is something Nintendo like to do, and even if it's a Nintendo Switch 3 edition of the game, which has Ganondorf's Fury Plus game added on, it feels like eventually we will see them seek to utilize Tears of the Kingdom and all the work they put into it some more. However, the doubt about the capacity to do this at the moment, and their statement prior that Tears of the Kingdom was complete, casts the likelihood of all this into some doubt. They may also worry about fatiguing their audience with the Wild era content at this point, having had 4 games set in the same universe that include the Hyrule Warriors titles, although on balance, I think they will still want to get the maximum bang for their buck before they move on. A new Tears of the Kingdom expansion may be far better received a decade from now when we have had a very different Zelda experience in the meantime, though. All the same, I put the likelihood of some kind of Tears of the Kingdom DLC by the end of 2028, which might just mean a small free DLC update for the anniversary or something more expansive, at 50%. As for a full-on paid DLC, this is still a much longer shot, but maybe not quite as long as many people believe, so I would put it at a 30% chance by the end of 2028. But what else is in store for Switch 2 Zelda? Check out my deep dive on screen for more, and also do check out the Patreon below for more early, ad-free and exclusive content from this channel. Thanks so much as ever for watching, and I'll see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.